This evening is called Dealing with Self-Destructive Behaviors, or more significantly, Stopping Them. And what I'd like to do is to give a frame of reference. I'd like to present to you a frame of viewing not just self-destructive behaviors, because those are just a sort of like the tip of the iceberg, but I'd like to present to you a framework for understanding life. And I think when we get a very clear understanding of life in general, I think sort of as a byproduct, many of the self-destructive habits, behaviors, thinking processes that we get caught up in will sort of just dissolve. So let me begin with a reference from the Talmud. The Talmud tells us a very fascinating event. There was a gentleman whose name was Rabbi Elazar ben Pedas. Rabbi Elazar ben Pedas lived in the time of the Talmud. He was one of the leading sages in Israel, a tremendously righteous person, extraordinarily devoted to his people, and despite the fact that he was a tzaddik, he suffered greatly. He suffered poverty, he suffered pain, he was sickly, and he had a very, very difficult life. To illustrate that, the Talmud gives us an example of what happened to him. One day he went for a medical procedure, and when he came back to his home, he found the cupboard bare. But bare doesn't mean as in, Mom, meatloaf again. Bare means literally nothing to eat. He reached in for a clove of garlic, which was the only thing he could find. He bit into it, and he passed out from malnourishment, unconscious. The word quickly spreads amongst the great Torah sages that Rabbi Elazar ben Pedas, the leading Torah sage himself, is unconscious. They gather round, and the Talmud relates to us that this is what they witnessed. He's lying there, unconscious. First he begins to cry, then he begins to laugh, and then a beam of light emanates from his forehead. When he awakens from that state, the rabbis who were gathered around asked him, "My high, what was this?" And he said as follows: "When I was unconscious, Yosef Imi HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God himself came to visit me. And I said to God, Mosai et sta'er b'hai alma, until when will I suffer in this world?" The very first thing he says to the creator of the heavens and the earth is, "Until when will I suffer?" And he said, God answered me. God said, "Elazar b'ni, Elazar my son, nichalach, is it good for you? Do you wish me to turn back the world to its moment of creation? Do you want me to reshuffle the deck? Efshar, maybe you'll be born into a time of sustenance." I said to Hashem, Kulei hai ve'efshar, you're going to turn back the world to its moment of creation, and re-begin everything, and maybe you'll find me a time of sustenance? I said to God, did I already live past the halfway mark or not? You see, Rabbi Elazar ben Pedas understood that he was being given a unique opportunity. The opportunity that was being given to him was to continue the life that he was leading, or to be put in to a different life setting. And he wasn't sure that he had the strength, the fortitude, the energy to continue his life, because it was very, very rough. So he asked Hashem, and he said to God, did I already pass the halfway mark? Did I at least get halfway through it? At which point God said, yes, you passed halfway mark. At which point he said, Lo ba'ina, don't give me a different life. Don't put me into a different body. Put me back into the life I was leading. God then said to me, says Rabbi Elazar ben Pedas, the reward that you're going to receive for saying that you want to continue life is a state that's so wide and so vast. Imagine that there's an estate with 13 rivers running through it. That's the reward that's waiting for you in the world to come. At which point Rabbi Elazar ben Pedas says, I said to God, Kulei hai v'sulo, that's all? Just an estate with 13 rivers, no more? At which point God said to me, if I'm going to give you more, what's going to be left for your friends? The Marsha, one of the commentaries, explains to us that when God creates each Jew, God creates a portion for that person in the world to come. If they earn it, it's theirs. If not, it's left over. Rabbi Elazar ben Pedas was saying to God, give me those portions from those people who didn't earn their share. At which point God was entertained by this exchange. He said, Giri bach, my arrows upon you, as if to say, touche. He touched me on the forehead, and the beam of light emanated out. And this is the passage in the Talmud. This is the section of the Gemara. And I'd like to ask two penetrating questions on this Gemara. The first one is rather obvious. The first one is we're dealing with a very righteous individual, a great man, a man who is, by all standards, a person who reached heights. God himself is speaking to this man, and God recognizes the fact that he suffers, and God says to him, the reward that's awaiting for you when you've finished your job here is in a state so wide and so vast, the entire state of California, 13 rivers. What is Rabbi Elazar ben Pedas's response? Kule hai v'sulo, that's all? Just one state? That does not sound appropriate. It doesn't sound like the type of response that a great man should be saying to God at that moment. It sounds greedy. And that's question one. But question two, I think, is much more significant. Question two is, if we're dealing with a man who's living his life for his people, a man who's other-centered, a man who really gets it, a man who is focused on exactly his purpose in creation, and he's a great individual, wouldn't you imagine that when God recognizes that he's suffering, and not lightly, suffering so extremely that the very first expression he says to God is, Ad masai et star, until when will I suffer? Wouldn't you imagine that God's response would be, okay, you're a good man. You've done well. I'll take care of you. Interesting enough, that's not the response. Do you want me to turn back the world to its moment of creation? Maybe you'll be born into a time of sustenance. If I were Rabbi Elazar ben Pedas, I would say, don't turn the world back to its moment of creation. How about a cup of coffee and a tuna fish sandwich? He's not asking for riches. He's not asking for a penthouse apartment. Basic sustenance. And not only doesn't God grant it, God says this rather perplexing statement, do you want me to turn back the world to its moment of creation, maybe be born into a time of sustenance? Why didn't God just say, okay, you're a good man, I'll take over from here? And I'd like to see if we could address these two questions. And to do that, I'd like to share with you a parable. I want you to imagine that an actor, Brad Pitt, receives a call from his agent. The call sounds something like this. Hey, Brad, listen, we got a great script. It's a guaranteed Oscar. I'm sending by the script. I want you to sign it in the morning. Got it? Okay. Brad gets the script and reads it through. His agent calls him the next day. Brad, we're doing it, right? Nope. Brad, is it the other actors? We'll change them. Not doing it. Is it the cash? We'll get more cash. We're doing it, right? I'm not doing it. Brad, what's the problem? Don't you understand? Playing this part means I'm playing the part of a loser, a down and out. I can't stand the embarrassment. Brad, that's just the part you're playing. We're going to do it, right? Playing this part means the whole world will see me as a down and out, a luckless idiot. I'm not playing it. He hangs up the phone. That conversation never happened. Why? Because every actor, as well as anyone attending the theater, understands that the actor has a very specific role to play. And every actor is judged by one criteria. How well did he play his part? If the part that he is to play is to be an idiot savant, and he plays it well, he'll win accolades, he'll win awards. If the part that he has to play is to be the most successful, articulate, glib person on the planet, but he plays his part poorly, the critics will rip him to shreds. The only criteria for judging an actor is how well did he play his part. And I believe that that's an apt parable for life. Before God created us, each of us were given a very specific mission, a very specific plan. We were given stage settings, we were given a script, and we're told, go out there and become the great individual that you were destined to be. But you will not get to choose many of the features of your life. No individual I ever met woke up one morning and said, God, please create me with 180 IQ. Suits me well. Oh no, an 80 IQ would be better for me. God, make me 6'4", powerful and strong. No, 4'6" and kind of wimpy would be appropriate for me. You see, none of us get to choose the life settings that we're given. Born into a particular family with much of the temperament already set, we're held accountable to grow, to accomplish. But at the end of the day, if you look around, you find there's vast inequalities in terms of talents, abilities, and much of our life. Each one of those are truly irrelevant. Because at the end of our days, each of us will be judged. But I won't be compared to you, nor you to someone else. Each of us will be judged by the most demanding, exacting standard under the sun. They'll hold up a picture of you, and they'll say, why didn't you become that? Me become that giant person? That is you had you lived up to your potential. That is you had you used your talents, had you used your abilities. But you see, the measure of the man is not compared to anyone else. The measure of the man is based on your abilities. How far did you go? How much did you accomplish? Because you were given the exact stage setting for your perfection. I got a chance to speak at my son's bar mitzvah. We decided we wanted a small family affair. We borrowed a shul that was unused. That shul only had a small Sefer Torah. And at my son's bar mitzvah, I told the story of another small Sefer Torah that had then recently been in the news. The story behind it went as follows. Rabbi Datsberg noticed a 12-year-old boy, Joachim Yosef. Rabbi Datsberg approached him and said, I want to teach you to read from the Torah. Joachim Yosef refused. Rabbi Datsberg, being persevering, said, I want you to learn how to lane, I want you to learn how to read, and I want you to read from this Torah on your bar mitzvah. And Joachim Yosef again refused. Rabbi Datsberg persisted and finally, in fact, Joachim Yosef read from this very small Sefer Torah in Auschwitz. Because Rabbi Datsberg had somehow smuggled in this Sefer Torah with him when he was brought into the camps. He saw this boy who was close to bar mitzvah, and he convinced him to read from it. And under the Nazis' watch, this boy read from the Sefer Torah in the concentration camps at Auschwitz. After the bar mitzvah, Rabbi Datsberg turned to the boy and said, and now I want you to do another thing. I want you to take this Sefer Torah with you. And the boy said, I'm a 13-year-old boy. I can't take responsibility for it. Rabbi Datsberg said, you don't understand. I'm an old man. I don't think I'm going to make it out of here. I want you to take the Sefer Torah, and I want you to promise me that the entire world will hear about this Torah. Again, Rabbi Datsberg persevered. Joachim Yosef agreed. And in fact, Joachim Yosef survived. He ended up living in Israel. He took that small Torah scroll, put it in his apartment in a very small closet. It remained cloistered there for 57 years. Ilan Ramon, an Israeli astronaut, was preparing for the space Columbia. He was scheduled to be on the shuttle. He had a certain question in science that he needed to discuss with Dr. Joachim Yosef. He met in Dr. Joachim Yosef's apartment. Somehow the conversation turned to the small Torah scroll, and Ilan Ramon asked permission to take it with him. And in fact, he took that small Torah scroll with him up on the Columbia. Unfortunately, as you may remember, the Columbia exploded into flames on its re-entry into Earth. But that promise made 57 years earlier was fulfilled. The entire world heard about that Torah. Now, the reason why I chose that particular story to tell my son at his bar mitzvah is because I asked him one pointed question. I said to him as follows. Did you choose to be born in the United States of America in the 1990s? Did Joachim Yosef choose to be born in Poland in the 1920s? Neither of you made those choices, but you had better believe that your life is vastly different than his. But you see, that's the point. A life was chosen for you as the ideal stage setting. You were chosen a particular generation, a particular family. You were put into a body with much of the temperaments and nature of it already set, and you were told, go out there and live your life. Ford those streams, climb those mountains, become the great individual you're destined to be, and at the end of your days, you'll leave this life, and they'll ask you one question. Based on your abilities, your talents, how much of you did you become? Not how much are you compared to someone else. Not how much money did you make. Not how great your IQ was. How much of you did you become? And this understanding is fundamental to understanding life. Daniel Goleman, in his book, Emotional Intelligence, which is well worth reading, writes, the studies show that they can tell the very temperament of an infant at 22 months of age. At 22 months of age, they can tell whether a baby, an infant, is bold or timid because it's hardwired into birth. And much of our temperament, much of our personality, much of our nature is not something that we chose. Now, don't get me wrong, we can grow, we could accomplish, we could go beyond limitations, but at the end of the day, each of us have a vastly different nature, vastly different temperament, given different talents, different skill sets, and I'm not supposed to become you, you're not supposed to become someone else. And one of the greatest, most damaging thoughts that we humans get involved in is we start looking around, start comparing, and we start saying, maybe I'm not so good. How come I'm not as good as she is? How come I'm not as pretty? And how come I'm not as popular? And why is it that he has such a good life? And why is it that she has everything just going for her and I don't? And when you want to talk about self-destructive habits, behaviors, and thoughts, that's right up there. The Chazon Ish, one of the great Torah scholars living in Israel, died in the 1950s, was always involved in Torah study. He rarely left his chair. Interestingly enough, when a mentally retarded person would walk into the room, he would stand up to his full height. And someone once noticed that many great people came in, many ordinary people, the Chazon Ish remained seated. But when a mentally retarded person came in, he stood up full height. And they didn't understand. And they went over to the Chazon Ish and they said, what does this mean? Why is this? And he said as follows: if God put a person into this world without full mental acuity, if God put a person into this world without his full mental faculties, it means he's been here before. It means he's been here before in this world. He reached a very high level of perfection. There's some area of perfection that he needs to sort of finish up. He was put back a second time because God would never put a person into this world without full mental abilities, because he can never accomplish his mission in this world. What it means is that this person has been here before, reached a very high level. Says the Chazon Ish, I don't think I'm on that person's madrega. I don't think I'm on their level. I stand up out of respect for him. A vastly different way of viewing life. A vastly different way of viewing people. But this understanding is fundamental and basic to understanding life. And when you understand this, you can look around at people, look around at situations, and understand them with a much greater, much deeper perspective. And you quickly realize that all of the things that we take credit for, so many of our natural talents that reflect upon me, really don't. The only thing that reflects upon me is how much I accomplished with the God-given talents that I was given. And understanding this helps us understand many life situations. You ever notice that some people are very, very successful? Things just seem to come naturally to them, and some people aren't. I had the unfortunate situation, I can't say it's unfortunate, I was very honored, but the most difficult shmuz, this is a shmuz by the way, the most difficult shmuz I ever said, I said 2 weeks ago. When I was asked to address a group of disabled men, a support group of men, all wheelchair bound, all severely handicapped, and I spoke about this topic. Thank God I'm healthy and well, and it was the most uncomfortable situation I could ever begin talking to them about, because it very, very much bordered on audacious. But I did it because that's what they asked me to speak about, and I discussed this topic. And I'm saying over this shmuz to a man about this distance from me who has no legs. And when I'm done, after 40 minutes, I ask for questions, and that man raises his hand, and he says these words: what does this have to do with us? Meaning what you and I see as an obvious disability, handicap, terrible situation, he didn't quite view that way, to the extent that life settings, life situations, what do you mean? And as a group, we went through the discussion to sort of bring it home. But you see, this understanding that my physical trappings, my physical settings are but life settings, stage settings. I'm like an actor on a stage. The actor isn't judged in the part, how rich he is, how successful he is. he's judged by one criteria, how well did he play his part, is a very deep fundamental understanding and requires an awful lot of thinking about. I know two brothers who are what I consider typical. One brother is vastly successful. Everything he touches turns to gold. He's financially very, very successful. He has a beautiful family life, happily married. His children are beautiful children. And he has a brother. His brother is what we call a shlemazel. His brother can't earn a living. His marriage is on the rocks. His kids are... And here's the observation. They were both born to the same parents. Both had the same schooling, both went through the same environment, yet they have vastly different lives. And I'm saying to you that both of the lives are irrelevant. You see, at the end of their days, they won't be judged by any of the stage settings, but rather what they accomplished with it, and how far they took it, what they accomplished with their abilities. And I have a little parable that I'd like to share with you that I think helps bring this a little bit closer to home. There was a novel written a number of years ago. I understand that was later changed into a movie and later done into another movie. So you may be familiar with either the original novel, the first movie, or the second movie. But anyway, the story goes like this. There was a football player who was getting in shape for Super Bowl Sunday 3 weeks forward. And to get himself in shape, he was riding his bike on a country road. He was coming down this way, and he was riding into a winding tunnel. Unbeknownst to him, a car was coming the other way. The angel of death was new on the job that day, and the angel of death saw the inevitable. Football player coming here, car coming here. Angel of death says, why wait for the blood, the gory mess? So the angel of death takes the football player out of his body before the crash, brings him up to heaven. They take the body of the football player, they bury him, he's dead, finished. Okay. The only problem is that the angel of death made a mistake. Any normal person would have crashed, would have died, deserves to be up in heaven. But he's an athlete with keen instincts. The last minute he would have veered off, would not have been hit by the car, would not have died, therefore he should be alive. But the problem is his body is buried. Now what do you do? So a whole tumult up in heaven. Finally they decide the only thing they can do, they find someone whose time in fact is up, someone as close in age as this football player is, and they put him back into the body of that other person. And there he is, he wakes up in this pampered, flabby body, looks up and sees this gorgeous palatial mansion, realizes that he's a rich tycoon, but also realizes he's got 3 weeks to Super Bowl Sunday. The cute part of the story is on the front lawn, he has the butlers and the maids running football drills as he tries to get his arm in shape for the big game. Okay, cute story. Here's the punchline. Could you imagine you? Could you imagine you being transported, being put into a different body? Could you imagine you being put into a different life? The same you, I who's speaking to you, could you imagine you being put into a different body? Now, whether you can or you cannot, I'd like to share with you one of the most key fundamental concepts you'll ever think about. And that is that exact experience happened to every one of us. You see, before we were in this current existence that we call life, we were a neshama. A neshama is the I whom speaking to you. We were up in heaven, and God said, this is the generation that you should be born into. This is the body that fits you. This is the family that's appropriate for you. This is the birth order. With a nagging older sister and a wimpy kid brother, this is the appropriate stage setting for you. You fit it like a hand in glove. It's the perfect stage for you to reach the greatness that you can become. Not by accident, not by happenstance, but chosen for you. And I believe, my friends, that is the answer to one of the questions that we asked on this section of the Talmud. When God said to Rabbi Elazar ben Pedas, do you want me to turn back the world to its moment of creation? Would you like to know what he was saying to him? It's not by accident that you were chosen and put into this life setting. Great wealth is a tremendous life test. When you wake up in the morning and you're rich, phenomenally wealthy, and you can buy and sell the entire town, and you look at your children and you say, I don't really need them. I don't really need my wife. I don't need God. I can buy and sell the world. That is a major life test. And as wealth is a major life test, so too is poverty. when you're so poor that you don't know how you're going to pay your bills. You finally scrape together the rent money. And late at night, you're driving your car, you hit another car, you look left, you look right, no one's there. Do you leave your phone number or not? That's a major life test. What God was saying to Rabbi Elazar ben B'das was, it's not by accident that you were born to poverty. It's not because I don't have enough money. God has lots and lots of money. He owns real estate in Manhattan, oil in Saudi Arabia. He owns diamond mines in South Africa. God has lots of money. The reason that you were born to poverty was because that's the ideal stage setting for you. That's the ideal opportunity for you to become that great person. Do you want me to reshuffle the deck, find you a different life that doesn't include poverty, that will still be the perfect setting for you? Maybe I can, maybe I can't, says God, because it's not so simple. And this understanding that an exact life was chosen for me, and this life suits me, is fundamental, key, and only when you come to deal with this can you reach a state of happiness. I guarantee, if you look around, you'll find many people who have things that you don't have, and you're probably not even going to be able to attain them. Things like intelligence, things like talents, just abilities, situations. And as long as you remain in a very small, myopic version of life, as long as the measure of me is what I accomplish in these worldly terms, you are destined to be unhappy. And once you understand that it really doesn't matter, once you understand that we're put on a planet to grow, to accomplish, we're each given a mission, and at the end of our days, all of it are but stage settings that really don't matter, life itself takes on a very different tint, a very different way of viewing things. However, this understanding does not come easy to us mortal human beings. We live in the moment. We tend to be very temporal. If it's here, if it's right here in front of me, it's real. If it's a little bit further, I can't see it. 2 years from now, it will never happen. 10 years, I'll forget about it. 20 years, it's not going to come. And we mortals are very, very temporal. And I'd like to share with you an example of just that. There's a book written by Alan Dershowitz. You probably know Alan Dershowitz from the Dream Team, O.J. Simpson Defense, a Jewish boy. He wrote a book called The Vanishing American Jew. Some of the book is well worth reading. Some of the book is not so well worth reading. I'll share with you one of the things that's not worth reading, but makes a good point. In the book, he discusses the fact that he, as a Harvard law professor, was teaching a course in comparative religion. The course was a survey course of the various religions of the world. And the focal point of the course was to analyze all of the world religions, which ones got it right, which parts they got wrong, put them side to side, Judaism, Buddhism, Catholicism, all the major religions, weigh them, find out which ones got things right, which ones got things wrong. Okay. At some point during the course, someone raises the following point. Religion is a way of relating to God. Religion is a way of understanding God. If we're studying religions and deciding which ones are good and which ones are bad, wouldn't it behoove us to rate God? Point well made. So in fact, they decided to rate God. How did God do it, this thing called creation? Okay. Now, before I share with you how God did, I'll give you some of the background. I guess you look around at the world and you see a lot of beauty. You see love, friendships, sunrises, flowers, poetry, a lot of good things in the world. On the other hand, there's a lot of pain, a lot of suffering. There's orphans and widows and some bad stuff that's going on too. So the rating, and if you don't trust me, if you look in the book, the rating that God gets, God rates a B minus. B minus. Okay. Not an F, no, certainly not an A plus, but a B minus, unbalanced. God did okay at this thing called creation. Okay. Now, far be it for me to judge, but if I were given the opportunity to rate a learned professor, I would give him a D for Dhamma. And I'll share with you why. Imagine that I pull this pen out of my pocket and I say to you, see this? This is a lousy toothpick. Oh, yeah. Lousy toothpick. Look, I'll show you. See this thing on top? You don't need it. And this clip thing, the barrel, you don't need. And not only that, every time I get it in my molars, I get it right back where I want it to be. I get this blue inky thing. Whoever made this did a lousy job designing this toothpick. That is fallacious thinking. It's false thinking. Why? Before you rate BIC as to how they did, you have to know what their intentions were. As a toothpick, it's lousy. As a writing implement, it's well crafted. Before you could rate the manufacturer, you have to know what his intentions were. And I say before you rate God, you had better have a good fundamental understanding as to why God created the world. Why did God put man on the planet? What does God want from the human being? And if you try to rate God before you have a very strong answer to that question, you're going to come up with some very silly conclusions, but you're not being honest. And I'd like to share with you a parable that I think well defines this very question. And why did God create this world? What are we doing here? And you'll excuse me for using a parable that may sound simplistic, but bear with me, it has a lot of depth to it. Imagine the following. Imagine that you're invited to a very exclusive health club. You've never been there before, but you know the layout. On the right side is the gym. The gym has the weight equipment, the Nautilus treadmill. On the left side is the spa. The spa is the steam room, the sauna, massage tables. This is your first day in the health club. You decide, it's been a stressful week. I'm heading right to the spa. But by mistake, instead of turning left, you turn right, and you find yourself in this room. And you look around. What kind of lousy spa is this? What are all these red-faced guys sweating and grunting and all this equipment? Whoever designed this spa did a lousy job. Mesilas Yesharim, one of the greatest works on Jewish thought, explains that is an apt parable to our life. You see, when God created this world, He created two worlds. There's this world and the world to come. This world is the gym. We were put in this world for one purpose, to grow, to accomplish, given vast opportunities to change the essence of me. And whatever state of perfection I reach in this temporary gym, when I leave this earth, when the body is buried and I separate, I remain on that level forever. The world to come is the spa. This world is the world of accomplishment. You grow. The world to come is the place where you enjoy. If you ask an athlete, is working out fun? It's very enjoyable. But it's focused. It's directed. And when you understand life, when you understand that we're put on this planet for the purpose of growing, you begin to understand all of the life situations. And you begin to understand life itself on a fundamentally different level. You begin to view life with different eyes. And I claim that if you do not accept that there's this world and the world to come, God would not rate it B-. God would rate an F. You see, if you sincerely believe that we die and it's over, finito, no more, then I'd like to share with you God did a terrible job at creating this world. And if you're not sure that I'm right, I'll pick but one of many, many examples. Let's pick one that we're all familiar with. Anyone here know of something called pain? Pain. Pain is very, very sophisticated. And pain comes in all different shades and nuances. If you smash your elbow, it feels very different than when you smash your shin. When you have a stomach ache, it feels different than a migraine. A toothache is vastly different than pulled muscle in your back. You ever notice that pain comes in so many shades and flavors? You could write poetry about the different types of pain. But someone designed that. And someone designed the pain delivery system. And you have to say to yourself, why? Gee golly, why do that? And if you begin discovering how sophisticated the pain delivery system is, you have a lot deeper questions to ask. When you study the neural pathways and you study how complex, all for me to have a bent over screaming stomachache, I don't need that. And I'll share with you one quick observation. Sometimes people will wax philosophical and say, well, pain is good and teaches you to avoid danger. Avoidance pain is processed in the spine. You see, when you touch the hot pot, the sensory input begins on the nerves on your fingertips, passes through the neural pathway, goes right to the spine, but it can't go to the brain because it takes too long. When you step on that nail, it has to be processed in the spine because right away you have to pull your foot away. The debilitating, crippling pain that we suffer is processed in the brain. That pain serves no good to man. It doesn't teach you to avoid anything. If you know a person who suffers arthritis and they can't get out of bed, don't tell me it teaches them to avoid life situations. It has no benefit. And one point that the Mesilas Yesharim, Path of the Just, makes, he says that if a person thinks about the human condition, if a person studies this entity called the human, he'll quickly understand that God did not create man for a station in this world, because if God did that, God blew it. But once you look at the world and understand there's a world here, this world has its purpose. The purpose is to allow me to grow, challenges, and opportunities that force me to become a different person. And I deal with those challenges, and who I become is based on my reactions to adversity. Do I deal with it? Do I grow? Do I become a bigger, better, more generous person? Or do I become a cripple? Not physically crippled, emotionally crippled. A cripple in my soul. Who I am for eternity is based on my reactions, based on what I think, based on how I go about this life. Once you understand that this world is the gym and the world to come is the purpose of creation, we're put here for a few short years to grow, to accomplish, but the reason and for eternity who we are is what we shape ourselves into as we exist in the world to come. You have a very different understanding of life. Life makes sense. Suffering makes sense. And all of the situations in life make sense because you understand that they all really don't matter. Their significance is only but stage settings that allow me the opportunity, that afford me the chance to become that great person that I could potentially be. But again, these concepts are not easy to come by. And they're often not discussed. And many people become very uncomfortable when thinking about them. I get the chance to speak in different communities, and I'm oftentimes amazed by certain reactions that I get. I'll share with you one interesting one. I was speaking in a certain community, and when I was finished, and people came over, Rabbi, we love the lecture, thank you, Rabbi, thank you. At the tail end, an elderly couple came over, and the woman said, Rabbi, we love the lecture. Her husband followed suit. Rabbi, we love the lecture, but. Now, I've been around the block long enough to know that when you hear the words, Rabbi, I love the lecture, but, something is coming. Rabbi, I love the lecture, but, according to what you've just said, I've wasted my entire life. Okay. Now, I'd like to share with you what it is that I said that made him say that. And if you remind me, I'll tell you later what I said back to him. Let me first share with you what it is that I said. I was a high school teacher for about 15 years. I taught in a regular yeshiva high school. These were boys who came from good homes, well educated. They reached my class, they were about 16, 17 years of age, and they had spent many years as religious, observant Jews. I would invariably begin the year with the following question. I would say to these guys, gentlemen, why don't you sin? Why don't you sin? And I don't mean little stuff. I mean go out there, murder, pillage, go out there, really do every evil thing you could ever imagine. So typically the guys would say, well, God will be angry with me. Shem will be angry with me. I don't want God to be angry with me. At which point I would say, listen, throughout the millennium, many, many wicked people have done quite well. In fact, they've flourished. Don't worry about God. Take care of yourself. At which point, at least one or two of the fellows would say, yeah, that's true now. But my neshama, my soul is going to burn. After I die, my soul is going to burn. I don't want my soul to burn. At which point I would look at the guys and say, aha. There are many things that you want to do that you're not going to do. Many things that you're going to do that you don't want to. All because your soul shouldn't burn. I have a piece of advice for you. Forget about your soul. You take care of you. Party. Do whatever you want. Do exactly what you want and let your soul burn. Why should you work and why should you take care of something like your soul? You take care of you and let your soul burn. Okay. Now, by the way, I would always stand by the door and not let anybody out before I answered this question. But let me share with you what I would say to these guys. Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, one of the father of the Muslim movement, one of the great ethical teachers, says to us as follows. The difference between a human being when he's alive and when he's dead is fundamentally misunderstood. He says the difference between I when I'm alive and I when I'm dead is literally, imagine I walk into the room and I take off my coat. If I take off my coat, I emerge. Says Rabbi Salanta, when a person dies, the body, the coat is buried. I emerge. I, the one who thinks, I, the one who remembers, I, the occupant of the body, steps out and the body is buried. But you see, it's not my distant cousin, not my alter ego, not some scaled down version of me, my soul that goes up to heaven. It's me, I, the one who thinks, I, the one who remembers, I, the one who's always been here, will go up to heaven. It's not my neshama, it's not my soul, it's I. And that understanding is very, very critical, because most people don't get that. If you ask the average person to describe death, so I guess it's at rest, you know, like Harvey was a good man, but he's at rest now. He's in his final resting place, right? You go to a cemetery, at rest. Rest in peace. Oh, he's at rest now. You know what rest means? Well, rest means like this. You break your arm. You're throbbing pain. Oh, you take Tylenol, codeine, Percocet. Does it. Finally, 3 a.m., I'm asleep. Oh, thank God. My arm no longer bothers me because I'm not here. Most people think about death as in, I'll be asleep. My distant cousin, my alter ego, my soul, it's going to go up there and worry about whatever I did here, but I'll be asleep, so it doesn't matter. Says Rasul Sallallahu, you're making one error. It's not your distant cousin, not your alter ego, not your soul. It's you. The body is the shell. It's the housing. You're wearing this cloak. The cloak is buried in the ground, and I separate. And I live on in whatever state of perfection I reached forever. But these concepts are often hard to get a grip on. So I'd like to do an exercise with you. Excuse me, the exercise isn't the most comfortable one in the world. We call it a Musar exercise. It's a growth exercise. If you're very uncomfortable, you could close your eyes when you do it. You probably don't have to, but anyway, imagine with me the following. You're driving on the freeway, and you're doing a bit more than you should be doing in terms of speed, and you're texting one of your friends, and the text that comes back, I can't believe it. Shattering glass, metal crashing. You're out cold. 3 days later, you wake up in a hospital bed. The doctor looks down on you and says, son, got some bad news for you. You'll never move another muscle in your body